When you first hear the word lacrosse, what are the first thoughts that come to mind? Do you think of the field that the game is played on, painted with different lines? Do you think of the stick that's used to play? Do you think of the pads, or do you even think of the different jerseys that people wear? What most people don't think of, though, is the people that created the game of lacrosse, which were the Native Americans. In the movie Crooked Arrows, which came out in 2012, lacrosse is much more than a game. In the opening scene of the movie, lacrosse is shown being played back in 1200 AD, but not in the same way that it. In current times, lacrosse is seen mainly as just a game that is played amongst people, but lacrosse is much more than just a game to the Native Americans. According to Donald M. Fisher in Lacrosse, A History of the Game, he states that studying lacrosse allows for an investigation of how and why people reach consensus or conflict, the changing meaning of culture, and the social, economic, political, racial, geographic, and technological factors shaping the contestation of culture. Joe Finn, an archivist at National Lacrosse Hall of Fame and Museum, states that it was played to prepare them for war, and it was also a social event where tribes would get together and trade for trade and sport. It was sometimes used to settle disputes. Apart from being a game, the natives had a much deeper understanding and purpose for the sport of lacrosse. Not only was it used for competing against other tribes, but allowed for natives to help prepare themselves for conflict as well as resolve conflict to help find a resolution. In the movie Crooked Arrows, the sport of lacrosse is used as a way to project the effects of settler colonialism on the native nations within the communities. Some ways that settler colonialism was displayed was through the use of not honoring the native nation's sovereignty, stereotypes of both native men and women, intergenerational healing taking place within the team and community, the American mythology of fearing the native nations, as well as the viewpoint of women as leaders.
In the film Crooked Arrows, there's a particular scene that really stands out in the sense of the sovereignty of the Native nations. The scene is during the state championship game at the Coventry Academy. Joe's old team, Joe's the main character. Mr. Geyer, the casino developer, approached Joe at the game about Joe's decision to add a new lacrosse field to the plans after Mr. Geyer had changed the original agreement. Mr. Geyer says to Joe that he's going to sue because this is not what they had agreed upon. Joe told him that he's unable to sue the tribe because the land is its own nation, meaning that the people who decide the verdict will be Native American. According to the National Conference of State Legislatures, tribal sovereignty refers to the right of American Indians and Alaskan Natives to govern themselves. Tying that in with what Joe had said, the U.S. Constitution recognizes Indian tribes as distinct governments, and they have, with few exceptions, the same powers as federal and state governments to regulate their internal affairs. Sovereignty for the tribes includes the right to establish their own form of government, determine membership requirements, enact legislation, and establish law enforcement and court systems. This scene goes well with the example because throughout the film, it is reestablished over and over again the importance of the game of lacrosse to the tribe and the impact it has on the Native Nation communities. And with Joe's statements aligning with this example, it gives the meaning and purpose of the film and a lot more credibility.
Just a moment.
Hey, isn't that your boss?
Hey, Joe.
Mr. Geyer?
Big game, huh? Saw you made some unplanned renovations. But I was wondering why my crew and my equipment are sitting idle.
Well, you know, when you asked if there were any other ancient tribal traditions that might get in your way?
Yes?
Well, this game is one I forgot about. So, we'll be keeping that land for our lacrosse field.
Joe, we have a deal.
No, we had a deal. You changed it. I just changed it back. There are a lot of other rich developers out there looking for wasted land.
I'll sue.
And What court? We're a sovereign nation. Your laws don't apply in our land. I have a game, coach.
Are displayed in the common native stereotypical fashion. However, with a couple female protagonists, we see different dynamics than women shown in films we've seen earlier this semester. For background, we're going to discuss Nadi's role. She's a young Native woman who helps her father coach a lacrosse team. In doing so, the young men on the team flirt, pester, and over-sexualize her contribution to their game. Among other examples, Nadi is cast aside with remarks about how she changed clothes while injured, how a kiss from her would fix an issue, the funny business that could happen if left alone with her, how her acts of harmless coach threats are taken as sexual innuendos, and the list continues. At 4 minutes and 53 seconds, just one of the many times that this kind of situation occurs, Nadi is coaching the team and telling them how to correct their mistakes, and she talks directly to Jimmy. So I will go ahead and share that now. So
Let's protect my back set. Saying dodgeball, moron. Your job is to try and get hit.
Yeah, and your job is to pass the ball, Jimmy. Owen was wide open when you got your ass handed to you.
Oh, whip. What's going on? Owen. Let's protect my back set.
okay. So there we see that, and we'll go ahead. So in this, we hear the boys jeer at Jimmy, ooh, whipped, busted, ball hog, and then they all laugh and giggle. Although they receive her message, she's not being taken seriously. Like mentioned before, another occurrence that demonstrates their stereotypical behavior towards Native women is after Nadi gets injured after stepping in for one of the players. Jimmy goes to her house. Jimmy goes to her house with Coach Logan to watch over her. And this is at 9:30, so we'll go ahead and watch that one quickly.
Nobody else can win, Daddy. Out there, you saw me play.
I heard the doctor. And if you don't heal properly, you may never play again. I've got a pain at the power. Stay with it. Pain medication. Oh.
Right, because I can't wait to hook up with the guy that got my ankle broken in 2 places.
Oh.
Okay. And then from Whitstock's article on leading Ojibwe women, historically speaking, Native women have been able to contribute to Native nations since our first accounts, although it was common for them to only take leadership when men were absent. In comparison, white women are taken more seriously, often yet still not given full authoritative control up until recently. They are also often displayed as too good to be with a Native man. There's an example of this in the film where Julie, a teacher, which is Joe Logan's ex-girlfriend, is a teacher on the reservation and is played off as the one that got away, the woman who can stand on her own without any man needed to care for her. Her character brings in a comparison of how white women are portrayed compared to Native. Bird describes this as the captivity narrative, in which honorable white women and children were degraded by lustful savages, becoming a staple of popular journalism and fiction in the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries. As the only non-Native woman in her position, this scenario plays into another construct by Bird, where Indian or mixed blood men prove incredible lovers for white women in romance novels, whereas American Indian women are invisible. However, in one instance, a girlfriend of one of the players contradicts the typical stereotype of the Native women being unheard/voiceless. Like seen in Wind River, as Natalie's boyfriend does the majority of speaking for her and is the only one to really defend her in certain situations. So we'll see an example of this super quick.
shove those feathers so far up your asses, you'll fly. Tight, but straight.
Okay. So there we not only saw the girlfriend of the player kind of standing up to him and being like, get yourself together. But we also saw Nady talking to the boys and, kind of giving that coach threats, saying, I'm going to do whatever with the feathers. And then just kind of being like, oh, okay, me first. That over-sexualization is a good example there. So compared to non-native leaders like Julie, the female leaders in this film struggle to be taken seriously and respected in the same manner. Nady doesn't seem to mind when the boys jeer at them or over-sexualize her presence as role as the assistant coach and the coach's daughter. However, her discomfort may be a conversation that American mythology and contemporary media hasn't really allowed her to negate, and it just allows it to be displayed in the cinema.
Native American people are faced with stereotypes in the modern day era because of films, books, TV shows, inaccurate stories, you name it. Crooked Arrows falls right into the same category with the rest of the Native American films we watched this semester. The stereotype that sticks out the most in the film is where Chewie, different character who hasn't been named yet, he's a bigger kid, and the rest of the team asked Joe to buy them more lacrosse balls because they lost all of them in the woods. Joe asks them why they don't go get them, and they say they're afraid of Mog, saying that if they go into the woods, he will attack you. They also said that Mog could run down a deer and kill it with his bare hand.
Hello? You must be Sasquatch.
Mog.
I'm Joe. The new coach?
Hardly.
I guess you've been watching. Crooked Arrow says you can play. You can see that we could use some help on defense.
I'm busy.
Well, you could help us win, be a part of the team, feel the pride. Meet some girls? Hit rich boys as hard as you want?
Later on, Joe sees Mog come out of the woods dressed as a stereotypical Native American with no shirt, shoes, etc., and just a little skirt that they wear in all the films. Although the boys are scared of Mog at the beginning of the film, they come to like him because he's a key part of the lacrosse team's success because he becomes the enforcer of the team. Instead of putting fear into his own people, he instills that fierce and strong presence into lacrosse against the opponents. Reflecting on the article, reclaiming representations and interrupting the cycle of bias against Native Americans, the author Freiberg claims that in order to break the cycle of representations of Native Americans need to be the ones to create those new ideas and representations of the Native nations that accurately reflect them. Example of this would be throughout the movie, Joe's father in Crooked Arrow, who is a main character in the film, keeps making the point of mentioning that lacrosse is bigger than those boys. It's the creators' game, and that they are to play it with honor, to honor the people before them, along with their future families and relatives.
When you first hear the word lacrosse, what are the first thoughts that come to mind? Do you think of the field that the game is played on, painted with different lines? Do you think of the stick that's used to play? Do you think of the pads, or do you even think of the different jerseys that people wear? What most people don't think of, though, is the people that created the game of lacrosse, which were the Native Americans. In the movie Crooked Arrows, which came out in 2012, lacrosse is much more than a game. In the opening scene of the movie, lacrosse is shown being played back in 1200 AD, but not...
All right, guys. I translated the plays into Sonaquat. And like the Navajo code talkers in World War II, we'll confuse the hell out of our enemies. You two help with pronunciation, please.
Vagina Dodge, really?
What'd you have here for B-cut?
Vajug.
Actually kind of means like a woman's, yeah, you know.
In current times, lacrosse is seen mainly as just a game that is played amongst people, but lacrosse is much more than just a game to the Native Americans. According to Donald M. Fisher in Lacrosse, A History of the Game, he states that studying lacrosse allows for an investigation of how and why people reach consensus or conflict, the changing meaning of culture, and the social, economic, political, racial, geographic, and technological factors shaping the contestation of culture. Joe Finn, an archivist at National Lacrosse Hall of Fame and Museum, states that it was played to prepare them for war, and it was also a social event where tribes would get together and trade for trade and sport. It was sometimes used to settle disputes. Apart from being a game, the natives had a much deeper understanding and purpose for the sport of lacrosse. Not only was it used for competing against other tribes, but allowed for natives to help prepare themselves for conflict as well as resolve conflict to help find a resolution. In the movie Crooked Arrows, the sport of lacrosse is used as a way to project the effects of settler colonialism on the native nations within the communities. Some ways that settler colonialism was displayed was through the use of not honoring the native nation's sovereignty, stereotypes of both native men and women, intergenerational healing taking place within the team and community, the American mythology of fearing the native nations, as well as the viewpoint of women as leaders.
And in this film, we start to see some of that as it goes on. And we see a lot of cultural formation. But the American mythology is still centering this film. In a lot of ways, we see that the white characters have kind of taken over the game of lacrosse and made it their own. And it's a big game for all these prep schools, and they're the ones who dominate the whole field. And when it reaches kind of the epitome of the film, the Crooked Arrows reach state championships against other giant prep schools who's done amazing in lacrosse. And when they get there, rather than everyone being like, oh, cool, like state championships, a lot of people are confused as to how this small group of native kids have made it to the championship. And so we see that the game has been claimed by the white press. The people don't understand why the kids are there. They don't really think that even though they're in state championships, they have much to bring to the table. But we also see that all of our characters have kind of changed the way that they play lacrosse. It changed the way that they look at the game, how they play the game, and a lot of their plays are taken over by traditional nation plays. It's a huge way that they change the game, they change how they play, and they change the way that they want to play. And rather than it being taken over by all of these prep school things, it's reclaimed by the nations, and the prep schools and all the white characters have to step back and like honor this game has a different standing for other characters, and that doesn't mean that they will always win. And it means that a lot of people have history in this game and in this game as a tradition. That's really interesting because it's at the end you get the characters and they win and they're celebrating, and they really bring all these traditions to the forefront. And all these other characters who dominated the field and dominated the game in general get pushed to the side and ignored. And that's, in a way, sometimes how it should be. For so many traditions and ways that have been created in different nations and different parts of the world, even, have been to bring the white Americans to this American dream, American mythology. Changing those things and bringing them back to their origins is a way to honor where they came from and kind of make things right, and hopefully create a different sort of progress than what the mythology is hoping for. This is something that Wheelcock mentions in her article, that not only do we need to do this in our everyday lives, but as media that we consume, the media needs to tell stories. The filmmakers need to tell stories. And that it's their responsibility to educate Americans about Indigenous peoples. They need to fill the void of knowledge with images that support the mythic basis of nation's identity. If we don't understand each other and see each other as other people with histories, we can move forward in a way that we can live and coexist together.